It's my pleasure to welcome back to the stage Catherine Winchester from CWTA to introduce our next panel, and I'll invite them to come up to the stage while she's speaking.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Today's panel discussion on artificial intelligence, debating human autonomy versus human innovation, will be moderated by award-winning journalist Rita Trichur. Rita is currently the senior editor for the Globe and Mail's Report on Business. She holds a Bachelor of Journalism and Political Science and a Master's in Canadian Studies. Please join me in welcoming our moderator for our next panel discussion, Rita Trichur.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion on artificial intelligence. We will be debating human autonomy versus human innovation. So as you heard, my name is Rita Trichur. I'm a senior editor at the Globe and Mail, and I'm also a business columnist for the Report on Business magazine. Before we begin, I'd like to share an anecdote with you all that I hope will introduce today's discussion. I had looked for an artificial intelligence joke, but those are kind of hard to come by. So I've conducted hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews during my journalism career. But I'll never forget the time that I interviewed a robot. No, I'm not making fun of any particular telecom executives who I've spoken to in the past. I'm actually being serious. About 5 years ago, I interviewed a Canadian cyborg named Hitchbot. Now, for those of you who don't remember him, Hitchbot was a robot that hitchhiked across Canada. He was made from household items such as a beer cooler, pool noodles, and kitchen gloves. He used voice recognition software to communicate with humans. Not only did Hitchbot bum rides from total strangers from the side of the road, he made small talk with them in the car and then tweeted about his journey using a 3G cellular connection. I'm sure a lot of people remember when that was the latest, most modern technology. Hitchbot's Canadian developers at McMaster and Ryerson hoped that their experiment would teach mankind that not all robots are to be feared. Now, I had never interviewed a robot before. I don't know if any of you have. And I'd certainly never interviewed a celebrity robot with an international following. Let's just say, like many of the executives that I have interviewed in the telecom industry, Hitchbot found many of my interview questions to be quite tedious. At one point in our interview, Hitchbot asked me if I was capable of making intelligent conversation. Who said that robots don't have a sense of humor? So about a year later, I'm sorry to relay that Hitchbot met his demise at the hands of a human vandal while attempting a similar trek across the US. So perhaps the real question, not just for the telecom industry, but also for our panelists, is not whether humans can trust robots, but whether robots should fear human beings. There's no doubt that artificial intelligence has become a buzzword in recent years. Industries as disparate as telecom, banking, manufacturing, they're all experimenting with AI. Proponents say that AI holds the promise of improving the human condition and shared economic prosperity. They point to potential advances in fields such as medicine, manufacturing, and transportation. Their belief is that such life-changing innovations mean that most people in the world will be better off in the future. We've all heard the mind-blowing forecasts on spending on AI systems. There was one from IDC that predicts that it'll reach $77.6 billion US in 2 years' time, or 3 years' time, sorry. But as you know, there are two sides to every story. AI's detractors also have a compelling narrative. Those critics say that AI represents a loss of control for mankind. Not only will humans become more dependent on machines, the critics say we risk losing our jobs to robots, and perhaps collectively we'll lose some of our intelligence in the process. The potential for misuse of AI is high. Data abuse, cybercrime, social upheaval, they're all serious concerns. What's clear is that Canada can't afford to squander the AI opportunity, but we also can't afford to get it wrong. So should we embrace or fear the rise of the machines? Well, our esteemed panelists have a lot to say on this topic. They include Marc Bellini, CTO, Canada Market Team with Nokia. You want to make your way up as I introduce you, gentlemen. Raed, Kadri, Director, Automotive Technology and Mobility Innovation, Ontario Centres of Excellence. And last but not least, Seth Jamison, Principal Systems Architect for FlashBlade with Pure Storage. For those of you in the audience, please take a look at their bio sheets to learn more about their backgrounds. And since this panel is all about disruption, we're going to do things a little differently and shake them up. We're going to forego with opening statements. We're going to dive right into the discussion. But we're also going to leave plenty of time for questions from the audience, so get them ready. Gentlemen, let's get started. I want to talk first about the opportunities with AI. So from each of your perspectives, what are the opportunities for both business and economic development? Maybe Seth, you can start.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of customers across varying industries, but I see a lot of potential, especially in healthcare. And kind of point solution utilities, autonomous vehicles are taking off, right? There's a big focus there. So, you know, any task that we perform on a regular basis that's repetitive, that we could gain accuracy from, or we could get time back, right? So I think time is our biggest commodity that we could try to save. I lose a lot of time behind the wheel of a car. I can't wait till I have a self-driving vehicle, right? So.
Well, self-driving cars is kind of what we do with the Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network, Ontario's initiative around making sure that we reap the economic benefits of these new technologies. And I think the opportunity with artificial intelligence, and echoing Seth, is twofold. One, that we can create more productivity in our manufacturing systems or other companies or industries where we generate economic value, which will extend their abilities, increase their market, and then let them put out more products. So I think there's a great opportunity that if you look at like automotive parts manufacturing, the opportunity there is to take the tasks that may be done by robots and artificial intelligence, not to replace the humans, but to augment the human's ability and have them do more value-added tasks. Also with that, and you talked about Canada's leadership in artificial intelligence, certainly we have an opportunity to develop the next generation of technology that uses artificial intelligence that we can sell into the global market. So it's twofold. It's increasing our productivity through the use of this tool to extend humans' capability, but it's also us developing the next generation of artificial intelligence that we can sell into the global market.
So I like to distinguish between what we refer to as artificial intelligence and what we refer to as machine learning. And the reason I do that is because we're leveraging machine learning today, and machine learning ultimately is taking the ability of machines to train themselves to recognize patterns. And we can do that today, and we do it today, and we use it quite extensively at Nokia throughout different areas of the business. And what it does for us is it provides the ability to analyze billions of records and develop patterns out of that. And that's something that ultimately, from a human standpoint, we would not otherwise be able to do. So when I think about machine learning, I don't think about trying to replace humans. I think about trying to do things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. If we look at the opportunities and the human cost, I think that if we look back at the machine age, at one of the last industrial revolutions where we introduced the concept of the steam engine, and we introduced the concept of automating work or automating physical labor. And I look at artificial intelligence, which is the next evolution of ML perhaps, or perhaps an augmentation past that. And I think about it in the context of automation of intelligence. So if we look at it from that perspective, what happened when we switched from an economy where we did everything manually to an economy where we rely heavily on machines to function within the world that we have today? And personally, I would say that I think we are all better off for what happened with that transition. And so I have to believe that with the human condition, if you will, and how we approach this type of automation and how we will respond to it, I think we will come out on the other side of this being a lot happier. So,
So Marc, maybe just to expand a little bit on that point, can you talk about, from your perspective being at Nokia, what are some of the specific business use cases that you're seeing?
So if I look at how we're using machine learning today, traditionally it's, traditionally is a hard word to use since it's quite new, but what we've started to do with it is look at areas of the business where we need to recognize patterns to optimize behavior within the network. That can be anything from, some of the earlier points of experimentation were around self-care or around care, where we would look at care records coming in and try to understand what is the next best step in the context of automated care, looking to solve customers' problems more quickly. And rather than trying to program the logic into the system to understand what a human was complaining about and what that likely meant in terms of a problem with the network or a problem with something in their home in terms of configuration or something broken, we started to leverage machine learning to look for patterns within that so that we could try to optimize the next best step based on what was most likely to happen based on the experience that we'd seen across our global customer base. If I look at what we're doing in 5G, let's imagine for a second the new 5G world. Now, what we're building today is ultimately what we call new radio. We're essentially hanging 5G radios off of 4G cores, and ultimately we're providing, enhanced mobile broadband, which, as Eros mentioned, is code word for, more of what we have today and faster speeds. If we look at what 5G promises to be, 5G promises to be a network that allows us to slice and provide a lot more refined SLAs and characteristics that will be provided to paying customers or paying entities to allow for low latency, to allow for reliability, to allow for speed, to allow for massive number of devices being off the network. And all of those requirements will drive an insane amount of configuration back into the network. So if we look at a static network that we have today, where we have a number of people trying to operate that network, and then you multiply that by thousands and thousands and thousands of slices, can you imagine how many people it would take to operate a network like that? Obviously that becomes very challenging. So what we are doing is we're leveraging automation, and in many cases based on machine learning systems, to allow us to automate many of the tasks to drive that network going into the 5G future.
So companies will benefit from more efficiency, cost reductions. That in turn benefits their shareholders. Consumers may not see all this kind of configuration in the back end, but will benefit from more modern technology, right? Your passion project is obviously self-driving vehicles. Tell me what the future holds there and why you're so excited about it.
Well, so self-driving vehicles, again, if we look at it from an economic perspective, certainly Ontario and Canada is an automotive jurisdiction that's benefited in our GDP and our economy has benefited for many years from that. And with the revolution, or maybe the evolution, whatever you want to call it, but the change in the sector, how we get people and goods to and from places faster, safer, and more efficiently, there's a great opportunity. And artificial intelligence is one of the, let's say the main components that people are looking at from the autonomous vehicle perspective. And oftentimes there's other parts of it, which is connectivity and such. But to be able to use AI to aggregate all of the inputs that the vehicle gets through its sensors, just like us through our different sensors, and be able to iterate and learn on the fly will help us to extend our senses, and we're talking about things that we may not have been able to perceive or anticipate, and help us to augment our visibility or our understanding of our environment as we're navigating through that environment. I mean, if you talk about self-driving cars and automation of vehicles, I think the runway is a little bit longer than people have talked about in the past, and I think people are starting to realize it. But as we continue to automate our transportation means and our modes, in this case vehicles, it stands to provide us great social benefits because you may see that car that's coming very fast behind you that you may not have anticipated yourself as a person, but this vehicle is augmenting your senses. So that's why it's the self-driving vehicle is a great opportunity for us, and that's where you see technology and artificial intelligence that will help us as humans and only augment what we are able to do as opposed to replace what we're able to do. Because currently in a vehicle, you still need to be paying attention, you still need to be present, and you will for some time. But even right now, the commercially available technologies are making us more and more, making things safer as they are. Because, like I said, for example, I use the example of when I brought my, I got a Jeep, and I was backing into my parking spot, and then all of a sudden I had a sudden stop. And I thought, man, I just smashed up this car I just got. It was the emergency braking that had decided I got too close to whatever was behind me and had decided to basically take action because I may not have anticipated what was going on. So those are the types of things. But what's really important not to miss is that as automakers and tech companies and others look at what the world looks like as mobility changes, as technology starts to change how we get to and from places. And it's kind of, as everybody may know in this room, being in the telecom industry, there's a lot going on in this space, and it's changing the way a lot of people anticipate doing business in the future and shifting things. There's a great opportunity for us as Ontario, which is an automotive jurisdiction, which has been a global leader in supplying the technology to the current auto sector, to evolve and allow for new entrants in areas like artificial intelligence and connectivity and other technologies to be embedded into the next generation of vehicles, for us to take that opportunity from an economic perspective, commercialize that technology, and get into the global market so that we in turn create jobs and continue to create jobs and continue to be a leading jurisdiction, especially in the new age where technology is taking over the vehicle.
Do you think that it'll help artificial intelligence, self-driving cars will help bring back some of the lost manufacturing jobs, particularly in Ontario? Is that the idea, or will they shift to a different kind of manufacturing job?
Well, artificial intelligence is actually, if you look at the sector, the manufacturing sector right now, a lot of them are interested. There's a super cluster that's focused on advanced manufacturing that's centered in Ontario, and that's a collection of manufacturers that have said that we see the future as embedding intelligence into our system, but again, with the intention to augment people's abilities rather than replace. And it stands to potentially create more jobs, because you'll need people to code, and you'll need people to do some diagnostics on if a technology goes down or a system goes down, because we're becoming more complicated. And so with that, again, if you look back at what we have here and what a lot of people look to Ontario and Canada for is talent. We've got a lot of talent here. And so, it's a great opportunity if we do it right, and we will, I hope. And I talk to manufacturers, especially in the auto parts sector, and they, again, see this, and working with their employees, see this as an opportunity to take the tasks that is not a good use of our time, and essentially use technology to do those tasks and free up those people to do other tasks. And through that, it allows them to take their resources further, get more sales, get more products out into the system, and essentially grow their business and create more jobs.
Well, Seth, you've said that you can't wait for the day for self-driving cars to become a reality.
Absolutely.
I also encountered traffic on my way here, so it'll be interesting to see how that it rolls out in the future. But I do want to talk about the challenges when it comes to AI. We've all heard about the high-profile AI blunders. For example, media reports have suggested that confused AI may have contributed to the fatal MAX 8 crashes recently. IBM Watson's medical program apparently gave out the wrong treatment recommendation for cancer patients in Florida, and doctors have been complaining about it. Self-driving cars, we had the pedestrian fatality last year in Arizona. There has also been here in Toronto a whole legal and privacy furor that's erupted over sidewalk labs in the Quayside project. So everyone has suggested, very rightfully so, that AI still has its limitations. Automated cars, perhaps the issue, and I'm oversimplifying it, has to do with the lack of peripheral vision and the ability to react. Others will say machines have no empathy, social intelligence, or a sense of humor, although my experience has been to the contrary. What is the best way to mitigate those risks? And Seth, I'd like to start with you.
I think it would be very tough to categorize a single best way to mitigate the risk. I think that we have to accept that we're developing a new tool. You know, it's like our long past ancestors discovering and capturing fire, right? It gives them great utility, but it can consume your home and leave you in ashes, right? So we have to be careful with this, and we just have to be very aware of how we're using it. So let's go back to your example of Watson Health, misdiagnosing. So we're trying to use AI to give us more accurate results in a more timely fashion. And when we use it to augment the experts, to give us kind of something that's directionally accurate, then the oncologist can go forward and fully diagnose and verify. It makes him more efficient. It makes or him or her. It makes the oncologist more efficient to treat more patients in a similar window of time, right? And this is kind of the utility that I see in the right way to go about. We don't want AI as we understand it today, and it's really the deep learning neural networks is, I think, a better categorization. But we don't want these neural networks to be the ultimate decision maker at this point in time. I think it goes back to augmenting, looking for, in manufacturing, we want more product quality. We want more efficient manufacturing. That's going to help us to be more competitive, right, against cheap labor over the long haul. And I think that we just have to be aware of how do we, when we're collecting data, if it is personal, how do we make sure that we're anonymizing the data without sacrificing the integrity of it at its source? So a lot of my perspective is the actual data, the sensor data. How do we collect it? How do we categorize it? How do we protect it so that we can train the actual neural networks and give us the best inferred answer, right? So it's important to understand where the data is coming from, what the sensitivity of it is, where you protect it. Because wherever you protect that data, then you're creating essentially multiple copies. When you have multiple copies of sensitive data, it gives people more access or more entry points to compromise your data set. So we just have to be aware of how we're using these sets of data across it.
Marc, do you have anything to add on the treatment of data and data privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we look at what we're doing with implementations like sidewalk labs and like diagnosis and whatever else, one of the key elements to being able to control access to that data, as you put it, was making sure that we have least copies possible of the data and make sure that we hold the data where it's being captured, right? So we believe very strongly in as we move into a digitalization of different industries, leveraging compute at the edge to provide localized processing of that data so that you're not actually transferring that across the country or across the world or potentially into jurisdictions where data retention, data policy, and data law is different. And that allows us a lot more flexibility to protect personal data. So one of the big changes in architecture coming with, I don't know if he's going to take it back to 5G, is the idea of bringing that compute to the edge. We are taking the network and we're disaggregating the entire network in 5G. We're bringing the notion of a core of the network and we're distributing it across the country, and we're bringing the notion of available edge compute, and we're taking that and we're distributing it across the country as well. So you can take advantage of that new distributed architecture and allow companies and entities and whatever it is to process data where it resides and limit the exposure from a data privacy and a data security perspective.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to Seth's point on some of the artificial intelligence technology, and again, to echo, it's about augmenting. And so I give another example too is of a technology where there's actually an Ontario company that has developed an artificial intelligence tool for lawyers, but not to replace lawyers, again, to augment and do the mundane tasks that is not value added for their time. Although I was talking to one of the lawyers the other day and said, well, we like to bill for that stuff, right? But nonetheless, the point is that, again, it's meant to augment what we're doing. We talk about privacy. Actually, I had the discussion yesterday. We continue to have this discussion. It's a very important discussion that we have, and I think one of the most important things to note about technology and how technology is changing and it's now becoming part of our lives is that we need to be a part of the discussion, and we need to discuss these things together in terms of how do we approach these new things. It can't be a unilateral discussion, unilateral decision, but rather we need to continue discussion. So actually, if you look at what the government of Ontario has done through the Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network, aside from the programming to support commercialization of new technologies in the area of mobility, connected and autonomous vehicles and infrastructure as such, so that we can reap those economic benefits. And there's other programs to support talent and regional capacity and such. There's also what they call the central hub, and that's meant to convene discussions and convene stakeholders and work through some of these really important topics like privacy, like data, like cybersecurity, with a group of stakeholders so that we, as we move forward as a society, in this case Ontario, and then more so in Canada and the rest of the world, we need to do it in a way where everybody's in the discussion and everybody's feeding in their concerns, their opportunities, and our way forward so that we aggregate those discussions and do the right thing. And I think that's an important part of moving forward and especially on topics that affect us all, is how do we do it in such a way where we are protecting privacy, where we are ensuring security, and we are doing things that, as we're doing that, we're reaping the benefits, both societal but also economic. And I think that's the key I always say is we need to include everybody in the discussion. Everybody needs to be a part of it, because then everybody needs to voice what their concerns are. And like you look at projects that have happened, if it wasn't for those, we haven't been able to voice our concerns, and then we start to have that discussion, and we start to say, no, this is not going to be how we want things to transpire, and it allows us to iterate, and it allows us to learn, and it brings things to our attention. And there's obviously concepts like privacy by design, which I think there's probably a discussion about this earlier in this summit. Those are the types of concepts where we need to look at applying those and things like that protect privacy and make sure that it is the foundation of what we do in this technology. But again, I also don't want to take away cybersecurity is a very important part of this as well.
What about data quality? Will we ever get it right? I mean, this is really dependent on the fallibility of human beings.
Well, I think if we look at the type of impacts of artificial intelligence and ML, machine learning, data quality is probably one of the areas we benefit from, right? Because when we look at things as a human being, or if we program a static algorithm to look at a set of data and make a decision based on it, chances are if there's a quality issue in the data, we're going to get it wrong. If we're using machine learning and AI, chances are we're going to be able to work around those spikes and issues based on a reconfigurable algorithm or a more dynamic algorithm that's allowing us to see what we're really looking for in terms of a pattern, rather than being obscured by a missed data set or something like that. I think it's
in the training phase of AI, there's this notion of distortion. So we actually introduce, we purposefully distort the source data that we're training on, and that builds a better model. You can think of it as showing a 2-year-old a picture of a cat, and they know, hey, that's a cat. Turn it sideways, maybe they don't know it's a cat. Flip it upside down, they definitely don't, right? But the more distorted the actual source data is that you're training on, the more accurate your neural network can become. So I think that to your point, Marc, the larger the data set, the more accurate we're going to be. Baidu Research actually published a paper saying to go from 93 to 94.5-ish% accuracy on their language model, they needed 10 million times more data. 10 million times more data for 1.2 to 1.4% accuracy increase.
Yeah.
So this is what we're looking at.
Raed, you look like you wanted to say something.
Well, no, I was gonna defer to Seth because but certainly I think data quality is important. I think again it goes back to creating these like standards or understanding, and I think there are around the world. But I think everybody in different jurisdictions need to understand as we're working together what are the standards and for data quality. How should data be presented? How should it be stored? How should it be shared? And I think that it goes back to this discussion, and I like to often say that data is a buzzword. So I say data to somebody, they think something, and I say data to somebody else, they're thinking something else, and so that's also part of the the discussion is, what does data mean to you? And then from there, we need to start to figure out, how do we simplify it for, you look at folks, there's technical experts that understand this, but how do we start to simplify it for everybody else that's kind of working in this space in different aspects of it to understand data? But certainly data quality is super important. Data standards are super important. And then how we transfer and the means and the tools and the securities and the measures that we take to do that are very important, but also just at the beginning, just starting to tackle the data. What does data mean? And what does it mean to you? And it could mean a data set for a small and medium-sized enterprise, or even a large company to develop a new technology, using it to train an algorithm or such, but it could also be transferring data between a vehicle and infrastructure, and what does that mean, and how does that look, and how do you look to protect privacy and create cybersecurity in that? But if we figure these things out, the forecast as a transportation system of the future is going to be the cars communicating with the infrastructure, communicating with the entire system. So if you talk about level 5 automation, a lot of people think it's just the vehicle. It's not the vehicle, it's the system. And so to get to that system, and some people are predicting that take longer than we anticipated. Or some people had anticipated. I never give a date or a time because I don't know, because technology changes so quickly. But what we need to do is have those discussions, because all of those aspects of data and what data means to a lot of people are going to be important in what the future of our transportation system looks like, what the future of the technology that we use looks like, and what kind of the future of our research and our commercialization of that technology from our post-secondary institutions looks like.
So when I talk to executives, and it really doesn't matter what industry that we're talking about, and I ask them, what is the thing that keeps you up at night? Invariably, they all say cybersecurity. So I would love to hear from each of you about, how real is the threat? Obviously, we've, all read about high-profile hackings, but are we actually prepared to deal with this threat? Who wants to go first? Marc, go ahead.
I can go first if you want. So cybersecurity is absolutely one of the most important things that we can consider. It comes in many forms. Are we prepared? Is it happening? It's happening every day. It's happening multiple times a day. It's happening to everybody. The only time you hear about it is when it's high profile and when it potentially is exposing personal information. But there are crimes happening all the time. I know I worked with a gentleman a long time ago, and he's now doing consulting work as a white hat hacker for the banks in the U.S. And he said that the amount of money they're losing on a daily basis is frightening. And they consider that to be perfectly acceptable because of what the alternative is. So it's there and it's real and it's happening, and we need to figure out how to deal with it. So we've gone from a world where we reactively looked for hacking signatures, and we tried to figure out how to mitigate them and how to stop them, how to block them, how to scrub them out of the network. We do a lot of this work on the network side as well if we're looking for attacks. But ultimately we're getting to a point now where the sophistication has ballooned, and it's ballooned partly because the attacks are leveraging machine learning and AI to figure out how to attack us faster and change more dynamically and make it harder for us to respond. And the realistic only way that we can respond to that is by leveraging the same technology to look back, right? So I'm not suggesting that it's good that we're here, but I'm suggesting that, absolutely it's paramount that we start taking a different approach and we start looking at this from that perspective. In terms of overall security, it has to be by design. I agree. I think that the panel on Monday was interesting, and there were a lot of good comments made there. And certainly, when we build, we're building public networks. Obviously, security is a foundational element of everything you do, from the chip design all the way up into the software design that layers on top of it. So, it is critical and fundamental. And I think the other thing I will add in there is believing that we can generate a single security system that's going to solve all problems is probably unrealistic. And so some of the approaches that we've started to take are what we call security orchestration, where we look at all of the different security elements that are embedded into different systems in networks and in and around, and we try to orchestrate between them to share the intelligence across those security elements and provide a little bit more coverage rather than relying on independent and standalone security modules.
Well, certainly cybersecurity is, again, foundational to anything as things become connected and more digital. In the vehicle and our transportation system and infrastructure is a big part of all of that, but certainly the vehicle itself, I think we've seen examples of how a component in a vehicle, typically what happens is people work really hard. I mean, in the past, they worked really hard to protect, the core components in the vehicle, but didn't think about, those components that really just not top of mind, like a tire pressure sensor or whatever it might be. But it's now become, because everything's so connected in the vehicle and everything's, is working on the same platform, it becomes a risk to the entire vehicle. And I think that we've seen examples of that. Going forward, we have to continue to embed cybersecurity, and again, with privacy into the foundation of what we do. But it's interesting, again, if you go back to the component level, if you look at a vehicle manufacturer, they have a lot of funds available, or I say funds available. They have more money than a small company or a small, medium-sized enterprises that might be developing a piece of a vehicle or a solution that's going into a vehicle. And presumably, those automakers are working really hard to secure it, but it would be embedding it into the design of that component at a component level, at an algorithm level, at a solution level, at a software level, is so important. And it's interesting, when I talk to some of the global leaders, and particularly one, he says the interesting part is the consumer will not pay a penny more for cybersecurity. Because if you were to buy a new car and you had you see all the features that you get, you're not going to pay $3,000 for cybersecurity because you expect cybersecurity, and you should, because it's now become part of safety. And if the intent of a vehicle is to be safe, it needs to be secure. And so the cost is going up on that, and essentially to be probably shouldered by the supply chain. But we need to make sure that they understand how paramount that's having cybersecurity being a fundamental part of their solution. I think they do, but we need to ensure that they can do that, even though nobody will pay the extra $3,000 or $4,000 to make sure that it is secure. So
if the consumer may not pay it, somebody has to eat those costs, and so it's going to have to be the company if it's not consumers. Costs of AI are already high, so it makes me wonder if there is a direct line, that you can draw a direct line between AI costs for everything, including the development of the technology, cybersecurity, and everything else that goes along with it, to increased revenues. How can companies ensure that their AI projects will be profitable? And maybe, Seth, you can start.
So there's kind of two ways that I look at this. There's monetization of data, right? So a new line of business, maybe with a data set, and you can create maybe a new product line using your data that you already own and the AI that you have. And then the other piece is just enabling a competitive technology in the marketplace that by default has to be secure to be competitive. So, and I think when we look at the autonomous vehicles, that's kind of the latter, right? And the cost is part and parcel of producing a product that's competitive in the marketplace. So I don't think that there is kind of a discrete cost that anybody will have to kind of line item out, as you were saying. I think that when I think about cybersecurity, I also, again, from my data-centric point of view, I think about what is our source data. And you talked about kind of collection on the edge and processing on the edge, and I think that's really important. And I think it actually goes into the standardization as well. So if we can collect anonymized data at the source, transmit only anonymized standardized data, right? If we decide what data we're in what format we're moving around and we're processing against, that can ensure a lot more security. When we don't have that standard in place, the likelihood that we have to actually transmit source data for processing into whatever my format is versus your format, then we're going to have a lot more opportunity for compromise of that data set. So,
Marc, you look like you want to jump in.
Oh, I was going to jump on the car one. I found that I have a funny story. I had a new car a couple of years ago. It was not a connected car, but it was one of these modern cars that has a lot of systems in it to protect the driver. And one day on my drive home from Montreal, I was up visiting family. A fault shot up on the dashboard, followed by another one, followed by another one, followed by another one. And in total, there were probably 18 or 20 faults that just kept scrolling through the thing, My indicators stopped working, the speedometer stopped working, everything shut off in the car. The car was still driving fine. And so I drove it home and I shut it off, and the next morning I got up to take it to the dealership, and everything was working. And it turned out that there was corrosion on a connector of a module in the rear bumper. And that module, for whatever reason, was programmed in to this array of other sensors in the car as part of an overall diagnostic of the car. Now, the car obviously had a lot of modules, but it didn't have a lot of intelligence because it didn't look for a root cause. It just started firing. Everybody started shooting arrows up. So you look at it from that perspective and you think, okay, the interconnectedness of what we're building these days is so much more complex, and it's so much more susceptible to that kind of an attack or a failure. Now, that wasn't an attack, but if my car had been a connected car and someone had been maliciously trying to mess with it, it's quite easy unless you build security in as a default. So I just wanted to relay that because I thought it was kind of topical, just given some of the comments.
It's a really good point. Actually, I'm glad the car kept moving because even when my car was just mechanical, I remember once my transmission went and I went into limp home mode, which I never experienced in my life, and I learned about limp home mode. I should have paid attention in engineering school, but limp home, I learned about limp home mode through that. I want to go back to AI and how do you monetize it, and I think you talked about it a little bit, Seth. And the difference is it's putting a more competitive product into the market, and consumers will pay for that convenience, and they will pay for that ability to have that vehicle that, well, maybe some. I mean, connected car, maybe not so much because he worked for Nokia and he knows what the opportunities are there, but they will pay for that convenience, and I think that's what's driving. And remember, that's what's driving the digitization of the vehicle and this change in mobility is consumer wants. Innovation in the auto sector traditionally has been consumer demand and regulations. So you got the two going on, and in this case, consumers nowadays want convenience. They want things to be easier. They want to extend their perception. They want safety. Of course, has always been paramount in the vehicle and will continue to be paramount in the vehicle. But they will pay for that, and they'll start to pay for connected services, and they'll start to pay for all these other interesting gadgets that make their car cool, to make their lives easier, that make them more productive, and also make them safer. So I think that for like artificial intelligence, what it stands to give, consumers will pay as long as the product is more competitive. And that might be the vehicle, it might be making their trip from, and I took this from one of the automakers, from Oakville to downtown Toronto a lot simpler because they're able to, it's able to basically decide what's the right route for them to go and what are their preferences and do all this stuff where it makes their life a lot easier. And they'll pay for that. They'll pay the added cost for that. So I think if we go back to economic development and the opportunity for us, there's a lot of opportunity to continue to iterate and to develop and to look for what customers want, and that be through a partnership with a global leader, to understand what customers want, develop a solution to that, and get it into the market, and that's how we will accrue those economic benefits here. And so I think there is a lot to be gained from artificial intelligence. When we go to cybersecurity, that is an expectation because it is safety, and so it's very important.
Well, as a mother of two, I would pay extra for a self-cleaning car because my children make a mess in the back seat all the time. Okay, we have about 12 minutes left. I'd like to take some questions from the audience, if there are any. If not, I have plenty of other questions for you. Right here?
One thing that is a bit of a hazard with AI that you haven't mentioned yet is the algorithms, the data sets that are used to derive the algorithms, and the data sets for training are all developed by people. People have biases. How do we protect ourselves from our own biases, which have caused interesting consequences in some AI systems? The infamous one is Google's facial recognition system that was inadvertently trained so that it recognized dark-skinned men as gorillas because that was the only dark-skinned hominid they had in their training set.
I guess I'll jump in. I've been part of a few different consortiums and panels, and this is actually a big problem, right? So we want to make sure that the neural networks that we build are as objective as possible. But depending on the data sets that we're looking at, when you look at a certain borough of a city that's impoverished and you're using only data from there to do city planning, it's very difficult to end up with a neural network that is not biased, right? So we have to be very careful and very mindful of what we're looking at achieving and how do we do this. I think that just like in the fabric of human nature, we end up with these biases. We have to expect that it will occur, and we have to be mindful of it, and we have to actually test for it. So as part of the training process, we take our data, we transform it, and do all the cleansing and labeling, whatnot. We train our neural network, and we also validate. And through the validation, we go back and we iterate that neural network, and we try to get the best result possible. And I think we just have to be mindful as part of that validation process that we're checking for these biases. And unfortunately, there will be biases that end up in the product, in the final product, from time to time, and we have to be aware, and we have to react appropriately to remove those.
I think data, data is the new currency, is the term that's always used. At the end of the day, the only way to try to take bias out of data sets is to make sure you have more data. The more data you have, and the more it's distributed from the arena that you're trying to build a neural network against, the more accurate you're going to make that data at the end of the day. So it's a challenge, I think, in the early days of AI because data is not always readily available. And I'm sure that probably contributes in a little bit of a bias way to rebias it on having bias issues because we're not using the data sets that are as broad or as meaningful as we need to. But I think that you raise a really valid point in terms of how do we ensure that as we're moving into a world where we're leveraging AI and we're leveraging data to derive meaningful outcomes. That there is someone making sure that we're doing it in a way that is meaningfully representative of the group of participants, if you will.
Yeah, I agree with Seth's and Marc's approach. I mean, I think awareness is fundamental. If you're aware that there's the opportunity for this to happen and you test for it and you do, we need to be very mindful of what the consequences, unintended consequences of us trying to do things better based on the limitations that we have from data sets that we do have, but being aware and putting in place processes to test and mitigate those biases is going to be fundamental.
I do want to add that we also have the opportunity to help us remove some of our human biases with, the advantages of AI. So I want to actually capture that. That's the good point. And I think that's a good opportunity.
And I think that, that actually, maps into a comment I was going to make earlier on, some of the discussions around, the misdiagnosis from Watson and the autonomous vehicle that hit someone, and what I read about, those was that, there was no way a human probably would have ever seen that either. So in fact, it was not that, AI wasn't able to do what it should have been able to do. It was that AI wasn't able to do what a human wouldn't have been able to do, what, at the end of the day, no one would have been able to do, arguably. You look at the Watson case and, how many misdiagnoses happen every day from human doctors around the country or around the world, and how often does that make the press, right? So really, when you think about it, I get it that it is there is a challenge there in trying to understand that a machine is making a decision or a recommendation, and we have to hold that machine accountable, and we have a real problem with that. But at the same time, what is the accuracy level difference between that and the human counterpart, right?
So I've as a reporter, I've seen both sides of it. I mean, we've heard of, for example, Amazon being criticized for its recruiting tool for having gender bias. But I've also seen companies in Canada, I'm thinking of Siona Asset Management, Kim Shannon. It's an asset manager that has actually used AI to remove bias from the hiring process. Their firm is 40% led by women because they have taken artificial intelligence to screen basically the job postings. And if they find that there's gendered language in the job posting and that results in a kind of not a large enough pool of candidates that it's inclusive enough for women, they will reword the job posting to get a more diverse pool. It's something that, in fact, I talked to our own human resources people at the Globe and Mail about if we're looking to be more diverse and to remove bias from the hiring process. Does anybody else in the audience have a question for the panelists? We have about 5 minutes left. No one? Okay, I have a question about regulation, and I understand that, Raed, you may not be able to comment on certain things, but for everyone else, we just had a digital charter that was proposed for Canada. I know the minister will be here today talking about other matters, but I wanted to get your take on the digital charter and just regulation more broadly. Is it a help? Is it a hindrance at this stage? If you, given your druthers, what would you like to see from policy? And anyone, please feel free to jump in on that.
Well, I think as we move into an age where data is the currency, as we mentioned before, and we're looking to leverage, AI. We're looking to leverage machine learning. We're looking to leverage automation within the world. And I'll take you a little bit down a sidetrack here. At the end of the day, this is all about productivity. We're trying to find a way to augment productivity, and we're trying to find a way to add value back into the human experience. And the reality of that is when you augment productivity, you are going to displace jobs. You're going to move them from one place to another. And so that's a reality we have to face. But the opportunity for us is to be a leader in AI in Canada and to use that as a new path or a new training ground for the jobs of the future. That said, all of this is dependent on data. And as we collect and synthesize and look at and train with more and more data to ensure that we get accuracy and remove bias and whatever else, everybody is going to be impacted by this. So I absolutely think it's critical that as a country we understand, where we're going and where the world is going, and we make sure that up front we start those conversations, as Raed said, earlier on, and we make sure that we're inclusive about how do we ensure that we're protecting, the citizens of the country in that new world. So I think it's absolutely critical that we have a digital charter, so to speak, and that we use that to ensure we're protecting the rights of Canadians.
Well, I won't talk about digital charter, but what I'll say is if you look at what Ontario's done when it comes to pilot regulations for autonomous vehicles, they've done a really good job of balancing industry's wants and needs, as well as maintaining safety and making safety paramount. And if you look at the regulations, and there was a change in January, it was welcomed by industry. It was very enabling in terms of innovation, but it also maintained safety as a paramount priority in those regulations. So there is a way where we can balance regulations to enable innovation, but in a safe fashion, that we make sure that society, us as Ontarians, us as Canadians, we reap the benefits and we don't suffer the consequences. So that's a really good example. Like I said, for those pilot regulations, they were welcomed by industry very, very well. They see it as an opportunity to continue to test and pilot in Ontario, but they do not trade off safety as a paramount priority. And so, going back to discussions, that's through discussions. That's through understanding what industry needs, understanding what priorities are for us as society, and then making sure that we find the right balance to allow innovation, allow us to be leaders, but then also continue to maintain what are fundamental, important aspects of our daily lives is our safety, our security. And so there's a way it can happen, and we need to continue to do that because we need to enable, we need to show leadership. We need to, and this is, like I said, this is what's happened with this pilot regulation, is showing leadership, but it's also ensuring that we maintain that, and so we can continue to do it, and it will help us from an economic standpoint because it will enable industry. It will make them want to do these things in Ontario, which will then spill over into other things like research at our post-secondary institutions. It will spill over into startups and entrepreneurship, and so. Talk about regulations and policy. There is a way to do it in the right way. We're enablers.
Seth, you get the last word.
I would personally love to see AI used in the creation of the legislation and regulations to make sure that we don't have biases, to minimize unintended consequences. I think we have to be really mindful of that. And this industry is going to change more rapidly than we could ever imagine. It's certainly not slowing down, right? We're going to see new technologies in 5 years that we've never fathomed. We have to be very accurate around what are the consequences of the regulations that we're putting in place that are impeding the quality of life, the health and safety of people, privacy, right? So hopefully there's an AI revolution in the regulation world.
That's actually a very fascinating thought because you could actually politicize policy.
I hope so.
Could you imagine something like that happening in Canada? I personally can't, but anyway. Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there because we have 25 seconds left. I just want to thank each of the panelists for being here today and engaging in such a great discussion. Thank you for being so open and frank. And of course, thank you to the organizers and to everyone in the audience. That's it for this panel.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you.